Thanks for having me here. So to start, I've been designing farm shelter belts, paddock trees for livestock cropping and vine and horticulture as well, farmers for 15 years. I've been in Australia for 20. I come from a part of New Zealand, North Island East Coast, where more and more land is going to forestry and less land is going to farming of other things. So, just the arrow?
Right arrow down in the corner there.
Oh, whoops, sorry. Killed it. There, look at that.
Okay, so yeah.
This relates quite well to my next slide. This is what I also do. I kill stuff. Quite a bit of stuff. And if I'm not killing it, I'm catching it. So foxes, feral cats on farms. But I also do biodiversity surveys and find things in places people don't expect to see them. And a lot of time, that's on farms. And I have to say this because it's true. Farms where people who have been farming for a long time think they've got very little and have started to believe that they are not good custodians of the land, when in actual fact their farming enterprise has often been the distance and the difference between a species going extinct locally or not. So what I want to talk about in the time I've been allocated is a native species. I've picked one out to help boost the health of individual gum paddock trees that can't be fenced off, because this is the question that I get asked quite a bit by farmers. Fences are expensive, yes, and they don't always fit with the model of the farm and how they want to operate. And that picture there, that's just up the road from where we live, and that is an example of what the drought did in the more treed areas. If you drove to Warrnambool and you sort of look to the east around Naringal, Nullawarre, it's a dairying area, and a lot of the farms there that had Ash Wednesday run through them kept their trees because they realised that they were pretty important. And the cattle in this paddock ringbarked all the messmates. But right next to these trees is the tree I'm going to talk about, which I think is more like a large shrub, and they didn't touch them, left them alone. Not because they're poisonous. So any of you who are land carers or have ever had a land care grant in your time will know this to be true, that a lot of the funding for land care activities have been in the linear model, have been in the fence off, block off or create lines of trees, because that's relatively easy to fence and it's quite cheap to build. That's at Mortlake, by the way, just before you reach the township. Oh, going back the wrong way. Look. But that linear model doesn't always work for what farmers have. That tree is just north of the town of Koroit. It's probably one of the oldest trees in the landscape there still, because that was a very strong potato growing, cropping and dairy farming area, and to survive that you had to be a properly big tree in the start, like when colonisation hit. By being these islands in the landscape, big paddock trees really cop lots. David's touched on this already. That's an example from actually at Woolsthorpe. And this is a road where the original settler planted these mahogany gums, which are a really weird species to have at Woolsthorpe. They're not native to the area. And periodically, about once every 8 years, they get absolutely smashed by these brown lace lerps. And they defoliate the entire stretch of these trees, and then they take about 3-4 years to recover, and then it starts all over again. But the good news is there are ways to buffer those negative impacts on these big paddock trees. So my talk today is about selecting a native, not the only one, and I don't have shares in a company that grows them or anything like that at all. Ways that you can look after these big trees by planting something else with them. So I've selected one that rates very highly and endures in a way that no callistemon would ever do. And you might already have it, and you might not have thought of it in this way. Looks like a boxthorn, doesn't it? It does to me. Lots of names it hides under. Some of them you might have heard. I'd never heard it being called a castanet bush. The two Aboriginal names that I could locate come from different parts of Victoria. I'm on Eastern Mar Country. I don't know what it's called there, but I know it as Berseria spinosa, sweet Berseria. The name comes from the structure of the seeds, the purse shape, and the fact that it's spiny. Now, people get all twisted up about spiny stuff, and yet they'll have acres of hawthorn. Like, get over it. Barberry is way worse. Gorse is up there, like massively worse, more than this. In terms of spines, the spines on a Berseria are nothing. It's also got a huge range. I didn't know this until I started doing this talk. Queensland, right round the curve of Australia, through Victoria into South Australia and also Tasmania. And what that tells you is not only does it have a big range, it's been successful. And you want something that's successful, that can cope with a lot of different variations of land. Tolerance and resilience is a good thing. And it's long-lived, 60 to 80 years. I've come across some on the banks of the Hopkins River at Framlingham, which I would guarantee are older than that again. They like to live under other trees. That's got to be a good thing too. They want to be there. It's not just you put them there, they actually actively like to be there. And they would have been way more common in this area. Driving up this morning, barely seeing any, even on the roadsides. They would have been way more common, but lots of things conspired together, including economics, to get rid of them. And I'm not having a crack at farming, all right, because I'm not. But repeated fires. The early settlers really struggled. They had no fire brigades. If a fire got going, it got going and away it went. But also things like rabbits, which have also affected the recruitment of these old gum trees we admire. Overstocking when people got into financial difficulty because there was no Centrelink in those days. Changing in drainage, deliberate removal. That looks untidy, that scruffy thing. What does that do? So in a lot of places it disappeared quite early on. And we planted hawthorn instead. The loss of Berseria under paddock gums has had consequences for the health of farms, but a lot of those consequences we are only just starting to comprehend. This idea, the things that David was talking about, a lot of that is relatively modern thinking about ecology and about farms. So what does Berseria bring to farming? Starting with the flowers, summertime. When lots of other stuff has stopped flowering, it's full on. If you've ever stood or sat next to a Berseria bush in full flower, you could just do an insect survey just there. Sweet perfume, abundant. The whole thing, it looks like a white cloud, it's gorgeous. They bring bees, hoverflies and flower wasps. That's just 3 of the things that they bring, but they're relevant. Bees, including native bees, of course, we rely on them for a lot of pollination. And as varroa mite kicks along in Victoria, we're going to rely on this more and more. But hoverflies are also very intensive predators of aphids. And aphids are a thing that a lot of cropping farmers really panic about. The flower wasps that are also attracted by Bersaria in particular, they dig down into the soil and they hunt scarab pasture grubs and kill them in a really horror-worthy way. Do you know? They inject an egg into the pasture grub and it eats it alive, keeping it alive till the last possible moment. It's quite horrendous, but there you go, less pasture grubs, more wasps. The leaves, drought, heat, wind, browse tolerant. If you saw that in a nursery and it said that, I bet you half the farmers in the district would just go, yep, I'll have half a dozen of them. The leaves also contain esculin. Esculin is a natural chemical and it's particularly found in Bersaria and it blocks UV light. So back in World War II, the government of Australia harvested the leaves of Bersaria at scale, I'm not sure where from, and turned it into sunscreen. There you go, stock can eat it, but they often don't, not because it can hurt them, but they just leave it alone. The spines, of course, prevent it being totally defoliated. That is also a good thing, especially if you've got very keen wallabies. The habit of the shrub, medium tree, non-shedding bark. No strips flying off into the machinery, carrying a fire by shedding off. And they have slender, flexible winds, a bit like a limbo dancer in the wind. You know, they move with the climate and they diffuse the wind and the light rather than blocking it. So you will get pasture growing right up to the stems. The roots are tough. That's Mount Clay, if anyone's wondering where that was. Horrendous tunnel erosion in that. The roots are really, really tough and they're fibrous and they have rhizomes in them and they bind the soil. Sandy soil, clay soil, whatever soil. Remember that range it's got? It's got it all for everything. It also, if planted near your paddock trees, helps buffer that paddock tree vulnerable root zone from direct physical damage by stock and potentially machinery. And after a fire, it reshoots from its underground rhizomes. I hope you're learning some stuff, because I did writing this. The spines and spindly branches protects all those woodland birds we love, and their nests from cats, currawongs and raptors. And they keep those birds fed and close to the tree that needs the services of the birds more often. So, how do you get sweet Bersaria working for you? Pretty easy. Clumps near your established trees, along drains, in rock piles, along fence lines. Wherever you can find a spot, put them there. They're not super fussy. And they can be planted at 10 centimetres tall, it's about that tall, in the drip line of an established gum and individually guarded for about 2 years. Most nurseries stock it, so it's not difficult to get. You might have to advance order so they can grow it for you, and that's a kindness to the nursery. They start out small and ferocious and they keep staying that way, but you can use things like, these are an example of what's called a wire wallaby guard. This is just at Orford, just inland from Yambuk, with a couple of, I'd use metal star pickets for sheep and macropods. And if you were using the cattle, if you were wanting it for cattle, use something a bit stronger and at least 3 pickets, because they do like to rub on guards. But you only need them for a couple of years. And most of the time the stock is not interested in what's in the guard, they're interested in the guard itself. You're just getting them ahead, getting their roots into the soil so they just can't be physically pulled out. Once established, you take the guard off, use them somewhere else. How many native plants can you think of that you can get away with doing that with? Not many. Maybe hedge wattle. spaced 5 to 8 metres apart, facing the worst winter weather or the summer weather, whichever costs you the most. They'll naturally grow together and create this kind of loose understory structure. So those are overstory gums with that Basaria layer filling the understory. They can be hedged if they're planted 3 to 5 metres apart. And as long as your stock aren't starving, and let's hope they're not, they tend to leave them alone for years. And even the wallabies out in the bush just nip the very end. They're not chewing the whole thing down to the base like they would do a Banksia. They can also be planted in shapes like a corral around the edges of an established tree, so that when the seed's falling out of the tree, it's got this place to grow where it's a bit more protected from everything else, if that's what you want. In fire-prone areas, and we need to touch on this, it's not a flamethrower. It's not like Phalaris. It's not like gorse. It burns, but not easily. Doesn't like to burn. And it might be useful to shelter vulnerable things from radiant heat and provide cover for one of my favourite things, native mammals like Antechinus. And here's one of them. Small native mammal. I think there's about 4, maybe 5 varieties in this region. They like the diversity of food. You know, this stream of insects, they're carnivores. Stream of insects coming to the Bursaria, living in the Bursaria, small reptiles. And they like the protection the Bursaria gives them from the things that want to eat them. They're about the size of a mouse. That's in our laundry, by the way. And it's eating peanut butter. Okay, so in closing, just remember that to bring these creatures and these insects and these beneficial things I've been selling you to your paddocks, you need to create stepping stones depending on what you want. And the more kind of stepping stones you can fit on your property, from the boundary, the nearest remnant, the neighbour's dam, whatever it is that's got, the better your chances of getting all these accumulated benefits of the biodiversity coming. All right, I don't get hate mail because I don't give people my email address that often. But there's my phone number, and you know that this is the voice you're going to get down the phone, and I don't take any crap from anybody.